Created in 1957, Dove's founding principle was that it was not so much a soap, but rather a cream. And its original advertising showing, compared to the stilted portrayal of women in the 60s and 70s, a more normal, more naturalistic woman at play, struck a chord with consumers and made it a very successful brand. But as we entered the 21st century, Unilever, who owned Dove, wanted to take that brand and expand it into lots of other categories. And simply being a creamy brand wasn't deemed strong enough. But something in that natural portrayal of women led the team in charge of Dove to look for a new position for the brand for the new century. And they committed to a large range of different studies of how women thought about beauty and uncovered some of the most discouraging and depressing data that I've seen anywhere in my travels. I looked at more than 10,000 case studies as I studied the Effies this year, filled with data. Nothing has made me more depressed than the data I'm about to show you. More than 3,000 women around the world were asked to describe how they viewed themselves, and only 2% described themselves as beautiful, only 5% as pretty. More than half the sample used either the words natural or average. And the source of that reticence to feel beautiful was clear from other sources in the data. When asked about the media, some 68% of the sample agreed that media and advertising set unrealistic and unachievable standards of beauty. And then even worse, 72% of the sample admitted that I feel worse about myself after reading a women's magazine. Terrible data. And Dove decided to do something about it. They created one of the strongest brand purpose-based campaigns of all time, the Campaign for Real Beauty. Dove's mission is to make women feel beautiful every day by broadening the narrow definition of beauty and inspiring them to take great care of themselves. And the campaign began in 2004 with an advertising campaign centered on outdoor advertising to begin with that challenged industry stereotypes. Then it moved to perhaps the most famous part of the campaign so far, the firming ads, which shock horror used real women in real situations, testing the product on their actual bodies. And the fact that 15 years ago, the sight of real women in their underwear caused such an enormous media response makes the point that Dove's campaign was so essential. 2 years later came the Evolution campaign. Dove was not content simply to challenge the fact that women needed to feel more confident about themselves. It also wanted to challenge a beauty industry that was clearly dealing from the bottom of the deck. But it isn't quite that simple, because if we look back over this 20-year period, for every ad in which Dove talked about the joys of curvy thighs and bigger bums and promoting its brand, there were also more standard ads that promoted the Dove product using a much more traditional approach to products and benefits. And for every TV ad that pushed this idea that the beauty industry was demonstrably harming women's self-identity, there were much more standard campaigns that really came straight from the Unilever playbook. For example, this ad from 2007.
Okay, so you use Ivory. Let's put their most popular bar to the test against Dove Bar. First, I have to wet the bars with warm water, just like a shower. Now I'm going to test the bars using these test papers, which were designed to behave like the surface of your skin. The harsher the soap, the more the test paper will be stripped away. The first time I saw it, I was really shocked. Look at the Ivory bar soap. If it can do that to test paper, imagine what it could do to your skin. The Dove doll is still pretty much intact. It's hardly been stripped at all. If this doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. So, I bet you want to try out the Dove bar now, right?
What you're seeing here is what the Dove team called their dual communications model. On the one hand, there was the focus on the Dove master brand, on the other, on simply their products within the category. On the one hand, there was the attempt to make their point of view and their mission famous. On the other, the attempt to leverage and apply that mission and that point of view to the actual products themselves. On the one hand, there was a strong emotional connection. On the other, there was good old-fashioned persuasion. And on the one hand, there was a specific goal of achieving cultural impact and resonance. On the other, there was much more standard mental availability and salience for their products. What you're seeing is essentially a two-speed model of communications effectiveness. And we know it works because in 2008, Dove lost confidence. They started to think that spending so much money on longer-term brand-building activity was probably not the best for ROI. But when they did that, sales began to flatten. And when later they brought Nielsen in, the Nielsen analysts confirmed that for every dollar they were spending on that master brand campaign, not necessarily promoting products, but promoting the brand, it was delivering more than $4 in incremental revenue. The point is there's a synergy here between these two different aspects of Dove's success. And it links beautifully to the work of Peter Field and Les Binet, the so-called long and the short of it. They're both very experienced analysts and indeed the godfathers of effectiveness to many of us. Field and Binet have shown time and time again with enormous amounts of data that if you look over time at sales increases, you observe two patterns. The first one is short-term sales activation. You spend a little bit of money on a short-term piece of performance marketing and bump, up come the sales, but as soon as you take that money away, back they go again. Then there's longer-term, incremental brand building that comes over a much longer period of time. This is the so-called long and short. Now, it should be clear that Field and Binet don't suggest long is better than short. There is no long without short. You need, as Dove ably demonstrate, both facets to your campaign. The problem is most marketers in the 21st century are working in a sub-12-month or sub-6-month time horizon. When you look at the world from that point of view, then it looks like the short-term performance marketing makes more sense because it gives you a better ROI. But ROI is a misleading statistic most of the time because the time variable on which it's calculated is often far too short. And indeed, what Field and Binet have shown empirically is that if you had a choice between just doing brand building in the long or just doing sales activation in the short, you should actually opt for both. And that's exactly what Dove have discovered. You want a long brand building mission to create brand equity, future sales, broad reach, emotional ads, focusing on the master brand, and around about 60% of your budget going in that direction. But you also need to exploit that brand equity with short-term sales activation, which is focused on current sales, target segments, very persuasive product line stuff, and about 40% of your budget. And Dove show you why. They've outgrown all the other beauty brands in terms of actual brand equity over the last 10 years, and they teach us several important lessons. The big one is combining the long and the short of it together, emotion, brand, and mass targeting. With shorter, more rational, product-based targeted comms is a recipe for total effectiveness. There are dangers in looking just at ROI and short-term performance marketing. The 60-40 rule that challenges you to put 60% of your budget on long-term, multi-year emotional brand building holds out in most industries. And look at Dove itself. If you ever want evidence of the long of it, look at that brilliant 20-year campaign, which has straddled this period brilliantly and continued to grow the Dove brand. Truly, there is no better case study to illustrate the long and the short than the power of Dove. Visit the Effie's website for a database of all their amazing case studies. And come to Marketing Week for more videos in this series and information on the mini MBA in marketing.